I would hand it off to Kimberly, who's going to get us started today. Kimberly, are you there?
I am. Yes. Thank you, Michele. And thank you to everyone who is on the line who's joining us today. I'm excited to be talking about our latest course, but even more so to have the folks who will be co-presenting with me today, who I will share a little bit more about as we go through the webinar. As Michele said, I'm Kimberly Timpf. I am the Senior Director of Prevention Education here at EVERFI. I've been in the field of AOD prevention for about 25 years now at this point. Started on campuses and also on several campuses, started out in residence life, like many people in student affairs, and moved into prevention, the area of prevention, and ended up actually coming to EVERFI about almost 11 years ago now at this point. So as I said, very excited to have you all here today. And with that, want to get us started. So with any of our webinars, one of the important pieces in the beginning or to start with is to really identify kind of the scope of the challenge. So this is in order to kind of lay the groundwork for what you're going to hear from both Beth and Sandra regarding how we approach the development of our new course. Always starts with kind of the scope of the challenge, which in this case is providing evidence-based prevention beyond the first year. Many efforts, including ours, started out as focused on first-year students. There's certainly a number of reasons for that. Window of opportunity and the ability to engage first-year students right away, and the importance of that, obviously, that we find from the research. But we've had many requests over the years for ongoing or follow-up educational courses. But before building a course, we always, first have to identify what the scope of the challenge is, what the needs are of folks who are requesting these courses, and ultimately, what is it going to be used and how can it be implemented in the most effective way. And so this is kind of how we start out every conversation. And so I'll begin by taking you through kind of what we did with the first version. Those of you who are on the line who are using Alcohol EDU for College understand, kind of the background on that. But really, the point was the challenge for us at that time was to mitigate the college effect, and that was around 2000, 2001. The college effect being, and this is a kind of a visual representation, but the college effect being, in essence, that we have a narrow window of opportunity for primary prevention, and evidence-based education and prevention efforts, can help mitigate that college effect, because in that narrow window of opportunity to really engage students right away, to get them on board, to provide that critical education that also will inform ongoing prevention efforts. So it's never meant to be, it was never designed as, or nor meant to be, as is this new course, the only effort that's happening. But because certainly all prevention efforts need to consider the needs of all students, not just those with a prior history of heavier problematic drinking. And so, important to provide not just, education for students who will potentially be drinking, but also information that can help students and help them reinforce the behaviors of the healthy majority. And that can also contribute to, if you look on the right side, that image of that shorter, or that the line that is the green line that is less steep, that shows you what you can potentially, what the potential impact can be of effective prevention efforts in terms of mitigating the college effect with students. So in developing Alcohol EDU, again, needing to kind of, again, focus and understand that the approach to effective prevention being evidence-based, certainly, that course itself was developed in collaboration with experts and researchers in the field. And, the interactive content at the time, there were some really phenomenal around, the time of the college impact, or the campus report from the NIAAA, And so there were, certainly multiple recommendations on how to engage in best practice, in terms of alcohol use with colleges. So that was the drinking, college drinking task force that put that report out in 2002, and ultimately informed by emerging research on evidence-based practice. So, really specifically, there was a lot of focus in our courses on social norms, bystander intervention, that type of, those types of approaches as being very effective. So that's kind of the understanding we started out with. But beyond the first year, what are we trying to accomplish? So in this slide, I want to share some data with you that is based on data that we've collected from 42,000 students who self-identified as sophomores, juniors, seniors, and grad students. So that's a group of 42,000. 98% of those are 19 years or older, and that's in comparison to almost 300,000 first-year students. And these are students who self-identified as freshmen on the survey. So self-identified in those categories. And what we found, there's not a lot of surprising results necessarily. And I think, and I'll kind of broaden this a little bit as we go on. But, things like, looking at driving after drinking, after 4 or more drinks, and this is past 2-week behavior. So definitely, we see a slightly higher rate among non-first years, and that certainly could be impacted by potentially these majority of students living at home. Behavior in terms of intention, so plan to pace my drinks over the next 30 days. More intentions among those non-first year students. Blacking out, first years, much higher rate of blacking out, but still again happening. And then of course with the pre-gaming, excuse me, almost the same. I'm sorry, the non-first years actually having slightly higher rates, although very similar. And that's certainly a behavior because of the nature of pre-gaming, which is drinking before going out, not necessarily before an athletic event, but drinking before going out to an event. That the research really is very clear that behavior is so high risk that it's actually predictive of a number of negative outcomes. So that's why, understanding that and trying to, again, present information that is evidence-based to address it is going to be critical. The other thing to point out is that over this, the timeline here, between 91 and 2016, Monitoring the Future has always, out of the University of Michigan, has collected data, for a number of years. And what we've seen in this time period is, 100% increase in number of high school students who haven't drank in the past year. So why that's significant is because we're seeing that trend in our data too, but even more importantly, we're seeing it when Monitoring the Future collects this data from all college students. We are seeing decreases across the board, even in college student drinking among high-risk drinkers. So we've got, a lot of data to look at and to really be thinking about, not just are we focused on mitigating risk as a main, as a main focus, but also, what else are we doing to support and reinforce potentially, healthy behaviors. And this is interesting, I thought, too, among reasons for not drinking. Again, in the green is the non-first year students. I can't drink due to a medical condition. Number of students who've decided to cut back, so older students have made that decision, and those who've had an alcohol problem. These are just, 3 examples. And so, understanding kind of the reasons for not drinking also can help as we look at the need for education to ongoing education to also support, healthy behavior as well. So looking at some of the, outcomes that are certainly problematic and dangerous, but also on the healthy pieces, not just a focus on first-year students and supporting those. So best practice still applies, and this gets us into a few challenges I'll mention in a minute. But clear, obviously, when we do prevention, we want to make sure that we are using frameworks that are, still effective frameworks that inform all of our prevention. So grounded in theory, and the social ecological model is certainly the most prominent there. Things like the Institute of Medicine protractor model is also kind of a helpful guide. But the social ecological model really is the understanding that any type of prevention efforts need to recognize that student behavior is really shaped by the environments in which our students live, work, and socialize. And so important to consider that. And in addition, there are a number of accepted guidelines when it comes to implementing prevention best practice. And, that includes things like training, incorporating evidence-based, efforts and regulations as they change. Things like, understanding that a single dose program really lacks sustained impact. And so that's why broader strategic goals are very important. That changing normative behavior hinges on data and behavioral modeling. So if you're going to do social norms, you also need to do that bystander intervention piece because you can't, they are not mutually exclusive. They really do reinforce and support one another. And that we need that ongoing data for that directed training, so directed at the groups or identifying groups that might be higher risk and therefore need a different approach or additional education. So, that can be identified based on data that's collected. And then ultimately understanding that any highly visible ongoing training demonstrates an institutional commitment and impacts the climate overall. And again, many of these practices go a long way to addressing this issue for first-year students. But beyond the first year, here's where some of our challenges come from. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm making sure that we don't have technical difficulties. So challenges to best practice. When we think of first-year students, we have plenty of opportunity, right, to access students and to reach students. Everything from orientation programs, residence halls, first-year seminars. Certainly, we have, a number of a window of opportunity here also to collect data, particularly those students who are working with us on Alcohol EDU and using Alcohol EDU, but any course that you're implementing at a population level and have the ability to collect data, it's very significant, and that data can really help inform efforts moving forward, identify some of those challenges, particularly in that first year population. And when you have the ability to mandate an educational program, then one of the pieces that is going to be so helpful is with first year students, you have again that small window of opportunity where you can mandate. That leads to a much more robust data set and the ability to really rely on that data to give you some significant and thoughtful feedback. Beyond that, or after that point, as you see here, as we move along through year 2, 3, 4, and even beyond, the opportunities to reach students tend to diminish, and as they diminish, it becomes much more challenging to be thoughtful and strategic about programs. So ultimately, sometimes there can be a strong reliance on in-classroom opportunities and social marketing campaigns, and those are both evidence-based. They have some evidence, particularly social marketing, not social norms marketing, but I mean, social norms marketing does as well, but many campuses will don't have the data to do a social norms marketing, so we'll do social marketing campaigns, but they do have limited reach. And yet, with students in this, beyond the first year, we tend to look at approaches that are quick or easy, and ultimately can lack an evidence base like speakers or tabling. And it's not that those things should not be done. It's that these are being used as the only opportunity to engage students. And one of the reasons for that is, as you know, many campuses have a requirement for first-year students to live on campus. And then beyond that, there is not such a requirement. Students start to move off campus, so you don't have access to residence halls. You don't have access, other than in the classroom. And so that's why there is kind of that focus there. And then there also is heavy use of indicated approaches like basics or e-chug. Again, both basics, brief alcohol screening and intervention for college students. e-checkup to go, both evidence-based approaches, but generally students will, get that information through those approaches as a result of a policy violation of going through the conduct system. So ultimately that is, again, as I said, indicated, it's an intervention. The behavior's already occurred. So while it's important that evidence-based approaches get used in that setting, that can't be relied upon certainly to be the basis of education that we provide. So just to give that, so wanted to just give that little bit of background, and then now turn it over for the next section to Dr. DeRico, who's going to move us through a little more of that in-depth and background on some of the challenges, particularly balancing research and best practice. And I've been fortunate to know Beth as both a friend and colleague for many years. And Beth was Associate Director for the U.S. Department of Education's Higher Education Center. And in that role, she assisted institutions with putting research into practice, did trainings, publications, workshops, and has been a principal or co-principal investigator on, a number of projects funded by local, state, and federal agencies. And so, has a lot of really strong, again, experience in this area. Additionally, she has contracted by a number of institutions to do analysis of their programs and policies as they relate to compliance with the drug-free schools and campuses regulations. And that's going to be a lot of the focus of Beth's presentation today. And we were pleased to have her serve as one of our subject matter experts in the development of this course. We really look to her for guidance on how to create a course that effectively balances this best practice and policy. So Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Thank you, Kimberly. Really appreciate that. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I guess the first thing I'll tell you is please remember that 2018 is a biennial review year. We'll get into the exact specifics of what that means in a moment, but let's take a look at the history of the way in which colleges and universities have addressed alcohol and other drug issues on campus and with their colleagues. If you can advance the slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, colleges and universities have been addressing alcohol and other drug issues pretty much for as long as they have been around. In my PhD program, where I studied the history of higher education, one of our textbooks cited one of the first written examples of colleges and universities addressing alcohol issues and consequences. The example they used was of Harvard University, where young men had gone to the tavern in the evening and come back and burned the barn down that they were living in. So in the early years of Harvard University, young men effectively burnt down their residence hall in a drunken, risk-taking experience, whether they were smoking tobacco or what. We can see that in the early years, in the 40s, research and practice really were scant, and what people really focused on was their sense of student drinking, and particularly the challenges faced by different genders. As we began to learn more and more in the 70s and the 80s, and particularly in the 90s, different policies and regulations were put in place. Research and policy have worked together to create a strong foundation, but it wasn't until 2002 with the National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse report, which is now on a website called collegedrinkingprevention.gov, where we could actually see what expected outcomes were from evidence-based programs. It was in 1988 that a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, passed the minimum legal drinking age law, and that was one of the first clear indications of the way in which policy could be used to change campus culture. This was a milestone, as was the drug-free schools and campuses regulations. These policies effectively created changes in the social environment. Today, we see colleges and universities working along the full continuum. In the early years, we started out with a focus on education and awareness, and we saw through the NIAAA report and other research reports that these educational activities were pretty weak at creating behavior change, especially, as Kimberly pointed out, they were often implemented in isolation or at particular times of the year. Today, campuses focus on the full continuum, from health education and awareness through prevention, early intervention, treatment, and recovery supports. These later items of early intervention, treatment, and recovery supports are especially important to students today. This generation is very concerned with social justice issues, and often young people in recovery are facing extreme stigma when they return to campus after treatment. We have a strong practice today that relies on research and theory and an evidence-informed framework. We do work in health promotion and risk reduction, but we also understand that mitigating harm is only one piece of this puzzle, and that helping young people live lives of meaning and purpose are as much as creating a biobehavioral health environment that fosters flourishing and well-being. These are important as well. As Kimberly said, a significant portion of this population is a non-drinking population, and so helping them find meaning in their lives is critical to their growth and development. Kimberly mentioned the social ecological model. The social ecological model has been used to create environmental change for many years, certainly since the inception of the U.S. Department of Education's Higher Ed Center for Alcohol, Drug, and Violence Prevention. This approach focuses our efforts on not only the individual, where education efforts focus, but on peers and particular groups, as well as the environment. This classic public health approach also relies on case law and shows us clearly that doing the right thing will protect us from litigation as well as move us to change. Important vehicles for change are the data collection that Kimberly mentioned through courses like Alcohol EDU, but also the data collection provides us with an important framework for strategic planning and evaluation. Evidence-based practices relate to environmental change, and the environmental approaches have been shown to be evidence-based. They address the campus and community problems in the multiple spheres that they exist, at the individual level, at the coalition level, on the campus, and in the community. They also rely on accurate assessment of the problems that each community faces. So in this way, each campus and community needs to rely on their own data collection and their own planning and evaluation methods. Each campus and community really is unique in this way. And they're supported by the courts. Environmental management processes are shown to be effective, and this is important if a tragedy occurs. It's important that environmental approaches are working towards creating change. They reduce risk, they increase flourishing, and in particular, as I had mentioned, this is a biennial review year. These environmental management processes and vehicles like data collection lead us to creating change on campus, but as I mentioned, in a biennial review year, they also allow us to leverage change by developing the campus task forces, the campus community coalitions that can work together and focus on data collection and strategic planning and evaluation. Through the biennial review process, we can bring these partners together to work towards common areas of concern. When we look at the way in which we use federal requirements, for many campuses, they're used in a pretty narrow way. The drug-free schools and campuses regulations are an unfunded mandate, and they convey the sense of Congress at the time that they were passed in the 80s. The sense of Congress was that campuses should have a prevention program and prevent substance abuse. Tobacco was not included in this because of the self-interest of the legislators that wrote the regulations. While at the original Higher Ed Center, I was tasked with conducting analyses for drug-free schools and campuses regulation compliance, developed a publication to support compliance and trainings to ensure effective compliance. This is the research to practice approach that Kimberly mentioned. Today, as Kimberly mentioned, I still do biennial review analysis for campuses, and I want to review quickly what the drug-free schools and campuses regulations require. So one of the things that's most well known is the requirement for this biennial review. This biennial review, required by Edgar Part 86, asks campuses to, on a biennial basis, review their prevention programs for effectiveness, consistency of policy enforcement, and recommendations for change of both. These also, the drug-free schools and campuses regulations also require annual notification. Annual notification items include conduct and standards of conduct at the federal, state, and local level, a description of the alcohol and other drug program that's in place, a description of the health risks associated with alcohol and other drug use, including dependence, short-term and long-term effects, and the likelihood of overdose. A critical component of the annual notification items are that they be written. Many campuses fall short in this regard. Many simply post a link on a website or send a link in an email. And this is actually a hasty approach because when looked at and audited by the federal government, campuses are caught short here and found that they're actually not in compliance. When we look at the risks associated with campuses not being in compliance, the risks are great. It's clear that campuses are being held monetarily, legally, and criminally responsible. Campuses can lose all of their federal funding should they not be found in compliance with the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act regulations. That includes grants and scholarships, work-study funds, research dollars, etc. Campuses are asked to certify that they have a prevention program and that they have adopted all of the components of the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act regulations. This certification is sort of confusing to people as well. The certification actually occurs whenever a chief financial officer signs their name to a grant or contract. In this part, it's called the grants and certs, and that's where the certification occurs. Can you change the slide? Campuses are expected to follow through and provide this information to those who ask. So campuses are required to keep records of the way in which they've not only conducted their annual notification items, but the way in which they've certified their program and the way in which they've conducted a biennial review and the results. These records must be kept for a reasonable length of time and can be available through Freedom of Information Act requests, or many campuses actually post these requirements on a website. It's important that you understand how the EVERFI work and this course can fit into your biennial review requirement. Sandra will review some of that, but I want to say that as I look towards the way in which campuses maintain compliance in 2018, we hear more and more about campuses receiving quite large fines for being non-compliant. There's a difference between auditing and analysis. Audits occur through the Department of Federal Student Financial Aid when a campus is asked to show these records to the federal government's representatives. Analysis occurs when a campus looks clearly with a critical eye towards how they've been in compliance and conducts the biennial review.
Great, thank you, Beth. And could you, I know one thing that has often gotten schools, has challenged schools is that there's an assumption that the annual security report, which is part of the Clery requirement, you know, that suffices for annual notification. Could you speak briefly to that?
Sure, thank you for that prompt, Kimberly. So there is a lot of confusion around three pieces of regulations for campuses. One is the Higher Education Authorization Act, 2 is Clery, and 3 is the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act regulations, Edgar Part 86. Some of this confusion occurs because they seem to ask for similar things. And that may be true in their reporting requirements, though if you really read closely, there are nuanced differences. Indeed, annual distribution is really very, very clear. Campuses must annually distribute information to students, staff, and faculty, and they must distribute it in written form. And these annual notification items have to take into account the way in which distribution occurs, bounce backs. So you have to ensure that a student, staff, and faculty person has actually received it. And they need to also take into account that some people don't start at the very beginning of a term, but transfer in, or faculty who are only teaching in one semester. For students, these regulations pertain to anyone who's taking not continuing education credits, but whatever's considered full-time at your institution. And the reporting requirements for annual notification are really different than for Clery. And so we actually encourage people, when I was at the Higher Ed Center and when I do consulting work now with campuses, I really encourage people to keep these reports very, very separate, because when they are asked to show that they've been in compliance, the data is not going to be all glommed together. You're going to have to show how you've addressed standards of conduct and consistent and reasonable enforcement. You're going to have to show how you've distributed information on federal, state, and local laws. The prevention program piece is critical also, and you have to show the kinds of things that you've done in your prevention, early intervention, and if you have a recovery support program, that as well. The regulations in the GFSCA particularly speak to exit, re-entry, and rehabilitation options. Clery does not speak to those issues. Is that sufficient, Kimberly?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. And I just I'm going to quickly go through the next couple slides to get us into the next section, as I certainly want to turn this over to Sandra, who has been really spearheading, of course, this course development as Vice President of Content here at EVERFI. And I think that it will become apparent as we go through this process as you go through, as Sandra walks us through the course and the development process, how we've been, able to pull together some of these pieces, both around the research, best practice, and policy, in a way that can be helpful to campuses as they move forward and have so many different pieces, boxes to check, so to speak. But beyond that box to check, what is the spirit, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law and policy. So Sandra, take it away.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Kimberly. I'm really pleased. I'm just delighted to spend some time together today reviewing the goals and the thinking behind the Alcohol EDU ongoing education course. We had a team of leading subject matter experts contributing to this project. It was a big effort, but both Kimberly and Beth, who are with me on the presentation today, were intimately involved in the development of this course. So I actually just wanted to take a moment to say how grateful I am for their work and expertise and collaboration, because as you are about to hear, we had aggressive goals with this project, and it could not have happened without such a strong team behind it. Just no way. The course was designed to refresh critical areas that are covered in the Alcohol EDU primary training, with the intention of empowering students to make healthy decisions through knowledge and awareness improvements. In addition, we know from our work with administrators and staff across many very, very different types of campuses that one near universal challenge that folks face is information overload. So we sought to make a course that eased compliance burdens while ensuring universal education that is informed by best practice. We wanted to support higher education institutions in delivering the critical required content, and we want to help students focus on the critical content in a really manageable way. We achieved this by creating the course in such a way that it can elegantly and efficiently support campuses in satisfying those student annual notification requirements that Beth was talking about related to alcohol and other drugs. So I'll talk more about the specific ways that we did that soon. First, I'd like to share some of the ways that the Alcohol EDU ongoing education is different from our primary course. And then I'll turn to the ways it's similar. While this new course builds on the best practices that form the foundation of alcohol EDU primary education, there are several key differences. One of the largest differences between the courses is the target audience. For the purposes of ongoing education, we started with the premise that we wanted a population-agnostic course, something with a low administrative burden that would work for all continuing students. So, from second years to graduate students. And we really envisioned, both your sort of traditional and your non-traditional returning students in the course audience. So we designed the course from the ground up to work for this very diverse group of learners. And that definitely is a challenging proposition. Another key difference is the course length. The ongoing education course is significantly shorter than the primary course, just 20 to 30 minutes. We wanted to keep the course focused on the key areas, and we recognize that continuing and non-traditional students have more demands and less available time. At the same time, we were absolutely committed to providing depth of content for those learners who want it. You'll notice there's a completion range for the course in terms of time. Well, that's in part because we included many optional readings and interactions for learners who want to dig deeper into the material, including several practice exercises that support learner understanding, for example, of blood alcohol concentration. And I will share more with you about that variable length in just a few minutes. To support institutions in meeting Edgar Part 86 notification requirements, the course includes substantive information, not only on alcohol, but also on other drugs, including detailed descriptions of health risks associated with drug use, misuse, and abuse. There's been a lot of discussion and frankly, a lot of confusion as a result of the various state laws legalizing marijuana at this kind of confusion we're seeing at the student and school level. Meanwhile, there are very clear dictates at the federal level. We felt a responsibility to cover this topic and make clear to learners the fact that the federal requirements are not affected by state or local level law changes related to marijuana. So, even though we were very careful about how much content to include in the course, this is an area that we covered and reinforced. Alcohol EDU ongoing also adds national and state law coverage. It's challenging research, but EVERFI's legal team has reviewed the laws of every state and written very digestible, understandable, interesting summaries for all 50 states. Not only that, but the content is updated regularly to keep up with changes in the law. So, this is just a huge commitment and an unprecedented level of assistance toward helping institutions meet their Edgar requirements. And I'm so impressed with the work of our legal team on this project. I'll actually admit to you that I feel pretty guilty about this. I am an attorney, but I did not personally do any of that very tedious and difficult state and federal law research. But what I did get to do was work on our amazing adaptive video stories, which are just fabulously engaging. Story-based learning is a core part of our learner-first digital design approach. It's an evidence-based technique that's especially useful for topics like alcohol and other drug use. There are so many ways to tell a great story, but in this course we used video to really bring the stories to life. From there, we took it to the next level by making the video stories interactive. So the learner watches the story and then chooses how the character should react, and then they get to see the result along with feedback. So, basically we're creating a sandbox that lets the learner play with different communication strategies or intervention choices and see the potential outcomes. The video stories in Alcohol EDU ongoing center on one character, Dave, who's a friend of the learner. And his journey through the course then allows our learners to connect emotionally with the real-life health and social issues surrounding substance misuse and dependence. And it lets them experiment and practice with bystander intervention strategies firsthand. It's a very compelling way to engage with what is a challenging topic. We further develop the same character later in the course in an interactive case study about drug use. So basically this whole approach humanizes the issues, and it helps generate empathy and provides a consistent narrative thread that the learner can follow through the course. And when you see that time range in the course, this is part of why there is a range, because depending on how the learner actually chooses to interact with the story, they may spend more or less time in that video story. So let me move on now and talk about some of the key similarities. Those were the noteworthy differences, but for those of you who are familiar with Alcohol EDU primary education, you're definitely going to recognize your favorite aspects at work in this ongoing education course. In terms of approach, in both courses, we strive to meet students where they are with regard to current drinking behavior. So this echoes some of what Kimberly and Beth were saying earlier, but this is not a punitive approach. This is not a course that's about shaming. We're incorporating a harm reduction approach while simultaneously supporting students who choose not to drink. Both courses share a mission of empowering students to take responsibility for themselves and for others with regard to alcohol and other drug use. As with the primary Alcohol EDU course, this ongoing course provides a robust data approach that allows our partners to leverage insights on their student populations and turn that into actionable change. We wanted to gather data and critical information to help schools feel really confident about where they stand and where they need to go and how to get there. For us, it's not just about checking a box, but about actually helping mitigate the impact of high-risk drinking and other drug use. So we continue to provide that same proven approach that's used in the Alcohol EDU primary course. We're gathering data, we're using pre and post surveys and pre and post assessments to do that. And I thought for folks who are maybe not as familiar with our approach, I would just talk for a second about how these are different. So surveys gather demographic data as well as information about attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors related to use of alcohol and other drugs. We do that pre-course, we do it post-course, and then again, longitudinally with a deployment window that the individual school specifies. Now that's different than the approach for assessments. Assessments are basically knowledge checks for material that's covered in the course. So we're going to assess what learners know before the course and then how much they have learned after the course. And together, assessments and surveys paint a really rich landscape of where your institution is and what progress has been made year over year. From there, then you have the information that you need to target or to pivot in your future campaigns. So let's look at some of the other similarities. From a learning design perspective, we always want to provide tailored content for the student learner. This is another aspect of our reliance on evidence-based design techniques. In addition to stories and settings that speak to the student experience, we provide opportunities for institutions to further tune the learning material to their unique environment. So, for instance, partners have the option to include a custom welcome letter with an image that's unique to the institution as well as written content. The custom closing letter is similarly specific to the institution. Schools can include a custom video featuring, your own faculty, staff, or your own students welcoming learners to the course. I also want to highly encourage every institution to take advantage of the chance to provide their specific alcohol and other drug policy. Our course provides an electronic acknowledgement feature, so this is not just you kind of throwing a link at folks. You are actually ensuring learner interaction with your policy, and you're recording their acknowledgement. From a compliance perspective, this is what Beth was getting at. This is a really important part of your responsibilities. And if you don't utilize the feature in the course, then the course is less effective at supporting your compliance than it could be. From an efficiency lens, using the feature makes administration really easy. You have clear reports about where your population is at, essentially at any given time with regard to this aspect of compliance. And then it's also a great way to help tailor the course for your learners from a digital design perspective. In the ongoing education course, there is even a place for a Good Samaritan policy. So if your institution has one, you can provide that. If your institution does not, it's no problem. The course is the way we've designed it is it'll display the page only if you've got a policy on that topic, so it's not like something will look like it's missing. But if you have one, that's a great way to get the information out. As with the Alcohol EDU primary education course, the ongoing education course includes a student engagement feature. We provide you the option to give your learners the chance to reach out for assistance with substance misuse or dependence issues directly from the course. It's very helpful to have a super simple way for students to get assistance while they're in the middle of learning and thinking and engaging on these topics. Now, I'd like to give you a short tour through our content coverage. You've got that course map in front of you. The course starts with an introduction, which takes a pre-course survey and assessment. It includes welcome videos and starts our social norming process by emphasizing that not all learners who take the course are drinkers. The next module, Back to Basics, reviews standard drinks, blood alcohol concentration, and factors that can influence blood alcohol concentration. And it also contains the social norming content that we've been talking about. Now, Module 3, which is Know Your Body, it's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and emotional effects of substance use. In just a minute, I'm going to show you a few examples of learning objectives on this topic and how we meet them. But I do want to mention that in this section, learners explore the difference between blackouts and brownouts, for instance, understanding dependence and how to recognize a problem. In Module 4, Know Your Responsibilities, we cover the core legal content required by EDGAR Part 86. It includes those required national and state laws, including penalties for possession and trafficking. And it covers that hot topic, the changing marijuana laws that I was talking about. So it clarifies that schools must follow federal law, even if cannabis has been legalized in some form by their state. And it also gives students the opportunity to learn more about the potency issues of marijuana edibles as well. This is a really important a topic that isn't always given the attention that it should get. And this section will also cover your school's alcohol and other drug policy. So that's where you can include that policy. In Module 5, Know How to Help, learners get skills to respond to an emergency and information, and they get to practice in helping a friend who may be in trouble. And this is a place where the school can add custom resources like maybe your local community has particular resources, or whatever resources are available for your particular institution or on your campus if you're campus-based. And also, this is where the learner has the opportunity to reach out for recovery support. And then in the course conclusion, learners will take that final exam and have a chance to receive a custom closing message from the institution. And then they get that second survey. The third longitudinal survey that I was mentioning, that can be sent out later at the end of your institution's specified follow-up window, whatever that window might be. And if you could advance the slide, thank you so much. So as we've discussed, IGER Part 86 requirements include detailed information on alcohol and other drugs, including descriptions of health risks associated with substance use, abuse, and misuse. Alcohol EDU ongoing breaks down drugs by their major classes and gives learners a fact-based approach to understanding exactly how substances can affect their bodies, minds, and relationships. As mentioned before, we also do significant social norming, helping students understand that not all students choose to drink, and of those who do, many choose to do it in moderation. And you can sort of see at the bottom on that slide, if you could just go back for 1 second, there's a, thank you so much, a slide showing the reasons students choose not to drink, so they can actually click and interact with all of those different students and hear all the reasons that the students are making to not drink or to drink in only limited circumstances. Thank you so much. It's also critically important for students to have the skills to handle an emergency or assist a friend who is struggling with abuse, misuse, or dependence. And that's why we dedicate an entire module of the course to knowing how to help. This module includes our interactive video story with the learner helping a friend seek out assistance for his potential drug and alcohol dependence. And you can see there, helping a friend is our character from the story, and then different interactions that the learners get to engage with. Across EVERFI higher education courses, we employ a curriculum that's grounded in behavior change theory to provide accurate information that helps students make informed decisions. Evidence-based best practices guide both our content, as you were hearing from Kimberly, and also our learning design choices, so that we're choosing interactions and ways of conveying information that also has strong evidence behind it. In this Alcohol EDU ongoing education course, we support institutions by covering information required as part of the annual notification in a more effective way than just sending a link to a web page and with a very low administrative list to do it. We always strive to engage and support the majority of students who are making healthy, safe, respectful decisions, while we are simultaneously discouraging misuse and abuse of alcohol and other drugs. And finally, the data that results from the student surveys and assessments working together is just invaluable in assisting institutions in identifying the challenges and the opportunities for intervention. So I hope that this overview was helpful and not too rushed, and I'll turn it back over to Kimberly now.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Before we close up, I know that Michele had one item that he wanted to touch on. So Michele, I'm going to forward the screen and you can take it away.
Sure, Kimberly, thank you very much. And thanks to Beth and Sandra too for this presentation. I hope everybody on the line appreciated us offering these insights into the development of our alcohol ongoing prevention course and the rationale on why this is important as a separate piece of education for your students beyond the first year. And so obviously we shared what went into the development of the course, and it just seems natural that the next step of your information and evaluation is to review the course. So we just wanted to interject before we bring this to a close to ask if you would like to actually review our alcohol prevention program. And so I'm going to launch the poll. It's going to flash on your screen right now. So if you'd like to have a review of the course, please say yes. Otherwise, please select no, so we'll know who'd like to receive a reach out from us following the event to get an introduction to the look and feel of the course and how these learning scenarios and learning strategies that our presenters have very effectively explained sort of work in motion. So we've had about 60% people vote. So I would say I'll give just a couple more seconds for those of you who still want to put their vote in, but then I will close this. And again, I just want to mention before I hand it back to Beth, that will bring us to a close today, that you'll receive a copy of this presentation, slides and recording. And if you could please fill in the survey at the end, that's very much appreciated. So Beth, would you like to wrap this up for us today?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for being with us.
I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to chat with us. One of the things that I found in my work at the Higher Ed Center and in my work since then with colleges and universities is that most of us look at policy as an onerous thing to enforce. We don't look at the way in which policy can be used to leverage change on campus. On campus, we have to focus our efforts where they're going to make the largest impact. Enrollment management issues, litigation, client-centered focus. These are the buzzwords that are critical to senior administrators. Federal regulations can be an important part of this mix and can help you get the support you need to create a culture of change and to also reduce risk to students, especially when you focused on evidence-informed practice that's research-based. Most effective DFSCA biennial reviews use a process where it is not one single person doing this work, but they gather a task force or coalition, and they gather people from these various sectors on their campus to describe the comprehensive alcohol prevention approach, their early intervention efforts, the way in which the policies support their program, and how these program goals are achieved. A biennial review process that looks critically at what your program strengths and challenges are, and also includes recommendations for the future, is one that will leverage environmental change. For the most part, campuses are falling short. They're being held legally and financially accountable and still not stepping up to the plate. There's an abundance of research that shows that using policy to create and support environmental change is an evidence-based practice. And my colleagues at EVERFI and I stand ready to help you do that. So let us know. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Michele.